Give me. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third webinar of the Brexit webinar series hosted by Universities UK International and the UK Government Science and Innovation Network. These webinars are for anyone who works in European higher education, so this is also for an EU audience and not just for a UK audience, aimed at European stakeholders as well. And with these webinars, we really aim to keep you up to date on all the latest developments in Brexit, and of course with a specific focus on what the consequences and impact are for UK and European higher education and research. So I'm Anna Majanse, I'm Head of European Engagement at Universities UK International, and hopefully joining me later on in the webinar is Michael Moody, who's Regional Manager, Science and Innovation for the Nordics and Baltics. He's got some IT difficulties, as you'll always see. Everything was fine just before we started, and then his laptop wasn't cooperating anymore, so he will probably join us a little bit later in the webinar. And also joining us is Inga Benner, who is the Deputy Director of UCRO. Now, UCRO is the UK Research Office in Brussels, and Inga has kindly agreed to join us for the Q&A session of the webinar. Michael, as I said, will join us a little bit later, so I will skip through his slides later on and we'll come back to them. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so if you have any questions, you can just send them to us during the webinar and we'll come back to them at the end of the webinar. What I want to do is real quickly just give you a little bit of information about Universities UK and what we do and these webinars. It might be a little bit repetitive for those who've already seen our previous two webinars, but we've got a lot of people, new people signing up for this webinar, unsurprisingly so, and we just want to flag this for them as well. So Universities UK International is part of Universities UK, and Universities UK is the collective voice of 137 universities in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, and our core purpose is to maximise our university's positive impact on students and the public, so both in the UK but also globally. Our members are the Vice-Chancellors and the principals of universities, and we are led by them and act on their behalf. Universities UK, as you can imagine, is the international arm of Universities. Universities UK International, sorry, is the international arm of Universities UK, and we represent our universities abroad. We promote them actively abroad. We provide information for them about them, but also try to signpost and develop positive opportunities for the sector. Now, my team, Team Europe, as you can imagine, focuses very much on Brexit, and we have been for the last 2 years. We are working with our members, but also with the government and also with the wider higher education and research stakeholders to really, try to get to the bottom of what this Brexit means for our sector and mitigate any negative consequences. Broadly speaking, we do this through 3 routes. The first one is that we represent our interests to the UK government. We represent our interests to representations in Brussels, such as the Commission and the Parliament and various higher education umbrella organisations. But we also do a lot of European engagement. And this is a lot of outreach to our sister organisation and, higher education institutions in Europe to strengthen ties and to work together in these times and to kind of sort out what Brexit means for them and for us. So this third webinar, as everyone knows, focuses very much on the consequences of last Tuesday's vote in the UK Parliament. I think it's really important to mention that even though the UK Parliament voted the deal down, this doesn't automatically mean that the UK is leaving the EU without a deal. There are several routes and options for the UK still to explore that could lead to an orderly Brexit, orderly exit, I would have to say. And Michael when he comes online, he will talk you through the steps the UK government is taking for this. That being said, we as a government, or we as a body representation, sector body representation, feel that we really do have a duty to our members, but not just our members, also universities in the EU, because they are affected by Brexit. And we feel that we have a responsibility to help them plan for, the worst case scenario. This scenario may not happen, but we feel it's our responsibility to at least give you some guidance and give you some support in how to prepare should this scenario come to pass. We realize that larger universities might be doing already might be doing many of the things that we are suggesting today, but we really wanted this webinar to also be useful for smaller institutions. And we're trying to give you as much detail as we can, but as you know, it's not, it shouldn't become a surprise that a lot of things are still uncertain, we still don't know them, but this is really us trying to give you as much information as we possibly can for you to prepare for a no-deal exit. Our advice is basically based on 2 papers that we wrote. One is for UK universities, and it's already online on our website, and the other one is a contingency planning document for universities in the EU. We are writing that with the European University Association, and we'll be publishing that shortly. And I've heard that Michael is online at the moment, so let's see and see if we can hand over to him, and then Michael will introduce himself and the Science and Innovation Network. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Emma. Sorry about that. I wasn't trying to disappear on you last minute. I assume it's the snow that we've got here in Stockholm that's causing a bit of trouble. Yes, so my name is Michael Moody. I am the head of the Science and Innovation Network for the Nordic and Baltic, and now I'm covering Russia. So my team are based in the 8 Nordic and Baltic countries, plus 2 people in Russia. So who is SIN Network? So we are part of government. We are kind of sit between 2 departments. So we are owned by BEIS, Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, but we are administered through the Foreign Office. And so we are based at a number of embassies across the world, and in Europe we have over 30 offices now, which has been increasing since the referendum, to kind of help us to do more across Europe in places where we've had limited exposure in the past. So our role really is to support and inform stakeholders on both HMG policy, but also to kind of understand and interpret the policy of the governments in the countries in which we're operating. And we work with organisations much like Universities UK, but also the Royal Society. We support Innovate UK and some of the catapults. We do a lot of work across different kind of spectrums, but our main kind of interlocutor, if you like, is the universities and the university networks, and how we can help them to do what they do, basically, and try and enable that as much as possible. So since the referendum, we've kind of been working on, and I've quite neatly put this into 3 I's, which is quite nice. So intelligence, influence, and interdependence. So quickly talking about those. So in terms of intelligence, we've been spending a lot of time talking to people like yourselves on the call, just trying to understand what it is that you are most concerned about. How can we understand that? How can we interpret that? And how do we, most importantly, feed that into policymakers and the negotiations as they kind of move forward? In terms of influence, we spend a lot of time, or certainly I have over the last few months, spending a lot of time meeting people at various levels of government, different policy areas in government, from kind of, I've had to pick up learning in things from kind of Euratom and understanding more about the research going in there, all the way across to kind of how do our students move, how do our professors work, etc., etc., and then trying to find a way of influencing governments to kind of understand the need of the UK kind of system, but also hopefully helping them to understand the value that the UK brings to Europe, as well as the value that Europe brings to us. And then finally, interdependence. So this is kind of linking those 2 together. So this is about basically business as usual as much as we can. So doing the kinds of activities that we would normally be doing. So, you know, creating partnerships, supporting researchers coming together to put together bids for Horizon 2020 is a good example of that. Working on regulatory environments which kind of allow the technology and the research that's being developed to be kind of brought into mainstream delivery. So low carbon energy is a good example of that, polar science, etc., etc. And essentially what we're doing is we're trying to both protect and strengthen the bilateral relationships in each country across Europe, so that in the worst case scenario, we still have a very good bilateral relationship, which allows us to continue to do the things that we're doing now. And then depending kind of what the outcome is, if it's a really good kind of deal at the end of all this, then actually it can enhance the relationship, so we can do even more than we were doing before. So I think that's quite positive to kind of talk about. So next slide, please, Anne-May. So Anne-May gave me a fun slide to talk about, which is meaningful votes. So thank you. So I think what I wanted to say here, just a couple of kind of really key points. So, I mean, the first one, which I've actually got third on the list here, but the first and the most important one is that the government is continuing to pursue a smooth and orderly exit from the EU. We want a deal. We think a deal is attainable, and we want that to happen. There is lots of planning going on, obviously, for no deal, which we can talk about a little bit later, but I think that's our primary goal, is to have a deal in place. As Anne-May's already mentioned, the PM brought the first deal to Parliament, which was rejected by Parliament. And so there are some reservations about different elements of that, and it's very difficult to kind of identify specifically what those things are. And so the PM has now begun some cross-party consultations to try and identify where she can tweak the current deal that will satisfy Parliament and members of Parliament so that they can vote in favour of the deal, but also with a caveat to them that this must be realistic, something that the EU will genuinely be comfortable renegotiating on. Yeah, so we're kind of working on that now. Next slide, please, Anne-May. So just very quickly, kind of looking at the upcoming timeline, and I was joking with Anne-May before this call that this has already changed since I wrote it about 8 o'clock this morning. It's already moved, but essentially the 3 steps that you see there, the 4 steps that you see there are still going ahead. So at the moment, as I've just mentioned, the PM is in consultation across party. So she's talking to all of the different government departments, all of the different political parties, plus she is making extra kind of time to talk to those of the far kind of end of the Brexit scales, so those who are Brexiteers and those who are Remainers, and trying to find somewhere in the middle that we can all come together. So that's what she's doing at the moment. She has agreed and committed to doing a statement in Parliament on the 21st of January. Now, this is where it's changed a little bit. We were under the impression that that would then be debated on the 21st with a vote and then moving forward. We've now heard this morning that that will now be debated and voted on the 29th of January. So that again moves the timeline a little bit more. But then following that, we expect the PM to head to the EU to start to talk to them about what has been agreed. So I'm afraid I'm unable to speculate about kind of beyond that point, and as to the willingness of the EU to change the deal in any way. That will be kind of handled as and when. Nothing I can say on that, I'm afraid. And again, just to kind of say, I think the really important thing for us is that we want a deal and we want it to happen, and so we continue to push for that. But we have, of course, as any kind of responsible government should do, is we've begun thinking about what will happen in the case of a no deal. And hopefully you will have all seen the technical notices that have been issued over the last year, which point to various kind of important issues. And you would have probably seen, certainly before Christmas and since Christmas, some contingency planning upscaling. So I think the most obvious one recently has been the trucks in Dover kind of lining up to see if they can still move. And I think you will see more of that as we kind of move forward until the deal is in place. Next slide, please, Anne-May. So just very briefly on these, I don't want to go into too much details because I think Anne-May will talk a little bit about them a little bit later on as well. So on EU citizens' rights, obviously the UK has made a declaration on European citizens in the UK, and that's available on .gov.uk, and it's quite comprehensive, so I don't intend to spend any time talking about that now. But we will see that a number of European countries are starting to issue their kind of equivalent deals on British citizens in their country, and so we suggest that you look at either through your local embassy websites, which will have links to the local government sites where this information is, or go directly to the government websites in your host country. Horizon 2020, again, really just this is an opportunity to emphasize the underwrites. In the case of kind of moving forward, the UK government has agreed to underwrite all Horizon 2020 projects. And from my understanding, the last version of that suggests that that will be for the lifetime of Horizon 2020. But obviously that will be dependent on how the mechanisms for delivery of that funding works, and whether that will apply to every single Horizon 2020 project. That will be down to how the EU interprets how we can fund those, because I know there's lots of technical nuances about different ways that those projects are run, and I don't have the detail to kind of answer those, I'm afraid. Erasmus Plus, again, the UK government has guaranteed to underwrite some of that, and there are other bits that are still being worked through with the EU and how that works, and I'll leave Anne-May to talk a bit more in detail about Erasmus Plus, if I may. And then hopefully those who need to know that EU students will be on the same fee structure as they currently enjoy for the coming academic year, so 2019-20. There's been no declarations beyond that as yet, but obviously it's something that the UK government will keep an eye on and see how kind of negotiations move forward as to whether more needs to be said on that. And that applies across England, Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, I believe, as well. I think that's me for now, Anne-May. I've frozen in time on my camera.
Thank you for that, and thanks for joining us. So from now on, the rest of the webinar will be really diving into the guidance and contingency planning part of it. I think it's important to flag that this advice has been the product of our work at Universities UK, a lot of concerns we had from members, a lot of consulting we've done in the UK, in the EU, and these are not government recommendations or government lines. This is really what we've put together and want to share with you. That being said, we kind of clustered it in two main areas. Well, it's the wrong word. Two main topic clusterings. The first one being very important, those that have direct effect on universities, you know, HE policies, programs, European policies and programs. And on the other part, you've got areas that do affect universities, but that are also interlinked with a lot of other policies that are not directly related to higher education, but these are things universities should think about and should take into consideration. So unsurprisingly, the main areas have to do with Erasmus Plus, Horizon 2020, student fees, qualification recognition, citizen rights. And the other areas that you have on the slide before you, these are only a few. I'll have a later slide with even more things on them. And I will pick a few to kind of explain the type of questions you should be asking yourself and the type of things that in these areas are important, but we won't dive into them the way we will do with the main areas. What I'll do is per area, I'll discuss what the measures or the recommendations we give for universities in the UK and for universities in the EU. So you'll always first have a slide for universities in the UK, and then you'll have a slide for universities in the EU. So diving right in with citizen rights and future migration rules, Michael already touched upon this. The government published a policy paper saying that even in event of a no deal, the citizen rights of EU citizens living in the UK and who've lived here before March the 29th, of living here by 29th of March, will retain their rights in the UK as they are right now. And the EU settlement scheme is the way in which they will do that. Now, there are several measures for universities in the UK, or several things to think about for universities in the UK. So first, identify your current staff and students with non-UK EU nationalities and use staff information to see what the risk is to your workforce planning and to work rights in the event of a no deal. Consider communicating to both groups, students and staff, and to tell them what the announcement has been of the UK government and that they have unilaterally committed that to their rights in case of a no deal. Reach out to EU staff to understand their concerns about their residency status, and also seek to identify individuals or groups that start at the university after March the 29th, if you already know, and communicate the changes with these people and see if you could have them start at university before March the 29th. Encourage all your EU staff and students to secure the settled status. The settled scheme will be rolled out in March, and the Home Office has an employer toolkit provided that both students and staff can use for this. For those arriving after March the 29th, it's uncertain what will happen. Rights are secured for anyone arriving before, but it's unclear what will happen after the 29th. If the withdrawal agreement, if we get a deal, then there is a transition period, and everyone arriving after the 29th of March until the 31st of December 2020 are also fine. But in the case of a no deal exit, this is not certain. So this is something that government also needs to inform us about what will happen in that case. Going to the European perspective for universities in the EU. So the European Commission, they published its Contingency Action Plan on December 19th of last year. And in that plan, the Commission really asks member states to be generous towards UK citizens living in their territories. The Commission asks member states to give all UK residents residence permits and to ensure that they continue to be a legal resident without any interruption in their country. The plan states, and I quote, third country nationals who have been legal residents in one member state for a period of 5 years must be granted subject to certain conditions, long-term resident status in that member state in accordance with union rules. The tricky thing here is the UK gave a unilateral guarantee, but of course in the EU it really depends on the member states what the specific rules and regulations are that a member state will place on a UK national living in their borders. So it really is important for you guys to contact the responsible ministry and the National Immigration Office to get the latest information about what kind of specific requirements will be put in place for UK nationals. Try and get an understanding of the implications for your workforce. Identify UK staff working at your university and use staff communications to communicate with them. Reach out to them also to be able to talk to them about their concerns about residency status. Communicate what the possible effects are of their change in status from a EU citizen to a third country national. And provide support for these members of staff. And also here, identify those staff that would have started after the March the 29th and see how you communicate with them and what you can tell them. Another thing is communicate what you know with your UK partners and share any specific issues you have with your National Rectors Conference. And if you'd like, with us as well, our email addresses are on the first or the second slide of this webinar, and we're very keen to hear of any specific national issues that are ongoing. I wanted to flag a couple of countries that have already publicly stated what they will be doing in case of a no deal for UK citizens. It's not an exhaustive list. Not all countries have issued statements like these yet, but just to flag the differences that exist between the countries. So for example, in the Netherlands, the Dutch Ministry of Justice released a statement saying that UK citizens living in the Netherlands have been living there by March 29th, have their complete rights as they do right now. The British citizens in the Netherlands will receive their temporary residency per post and then have 15 months in which the government will invite them to come and apply for permanent residency. In Germany, the German ministers have drafted a bill that says also, British citizens living here will continue and have their rights the way they have right now. They will instigate a 3-month period, and they might extend that, in which UK citizens will then have to apply for a resident permit. It will work similarly to the EU settlement scheme. In the Czech Republic, they approved a bill that guarantees UK citizens' right to stay, again with the same rights. The law will only become effective if the UK actually leaves without a deal on March 29th. And they will also implement a 15-month period in which the UK citizens would then have to apply for residency permits. Then the UK and the Republic of Ireland have bilaterally committed to maintaining the common travel area, and this means that British citizens residing in Ireland will continue to enjoy the same rights as they do right now without need of going through any registration process. So this is also in case of a no deal. Then the last one I want to mention is France, because this one's a little bit different. The French government published a draft no-deal bill saying that in case of a no-deal, UK citizens residing in France will be subject to common law, which is the law that applies to all the countries that have to apply for a visa. So their UK citizens would have to apply for a visa if they intend to stay for longer than 3 months. There are many countries that have said, we'll only publish a bill, or we'll only speak about this publicly if it's really absolutely 100% sure that the UK is leaving without a deal. So really do check with your ministry, your responsible ministry, with your National Migration Office on what the specific rules and requirements are to stay up to date of what that means for your staff, UK staff working in your universities. Then on Erasmus, as Michael mentioned, we have a financial guarantee, or underwrite as we call it, in place from the UK government, in which they say they have financially guaranteed the funding received by UK institutions in both centralised and decentralised actions until the end of the programme. However, there are still some uncertainties concerning this underwrite, and that is why we feel that the government should need to address a couple of things. For example, the lack of clarity how the existing underwrite works, the lack of clarity on whether or not Erasmus interinstitutional agreements would still be valid, whether or not we would need to renegotiate interinstitutional agreements. If the UK is no longer a programme country, would we still be able to participate in the Swiss SEMP mobility programme? There is no reassurances yet that the UK will actually associate to the successor programme, and there are no details on what, if anything, could replace Erasmus if the UK is not to associate. So as you can imagine, we're asking the UK government for clarity on all of these issues, but we're also asking for clarity for information for students who are on Erasmus at the point of exit, and also what kind of criteria are going to be applied for those calls that will be, or those proposals that will be submitted before the exit date but awarded after the exit date. Interesting to note is that we have been told that there will be a new technical notice published next week on the underwrite and Erasmus and how that will specifically work. So that is something to keep your eye out for, and that is something that would be published on the UK government's website. So measures for universities in the UK. Of course, stay up to date by checking your national agency website and contacting them for any guidance they may provide, but do recognise that they are limited in what they can do because they are the UK's administrator of Erasmus. Identify Erasmus students and staff currently on placements and who will be on placements on the 29th of March, and keep them up to date of all the relevant latest developments. A really specific one is that you can apply for 24-month grant agreements at the next Erasmus call, which is now and closes in February. You have 14-month grant agreements and 24-month grant agreements, and you cannot apply for 2 cohorts worth of funding in 24-month grant agreement. However, it would give universities 8 months extra to spend any underspend they have before returning it to the national agency. And one thing I want to stress is that although we don't know whether the UK will be eligible to receive grants after the point of exit, which really depends on the agreement the UK government will get with the EU, we are advising UK universities to apply anyway, because if you're not applying, then you rule yourself out by default. And if there is a deal, then nothing changes. And even in case of a no deal, there is an underwrite, and the UK government is committed to making this run as smoothly as possible. So we are encouraging UK universities to still apply, and we're also encouraging EU universities to continue to apply with UK universities. Speak to your partners, your international partners, regularly on to get an overview of your Erasmus Plus partnerships, but of course also on the latest developments, and also with the eye on the future to secure cooperation, because we really think it's very important that you think about options about continuing your partnerships out of Erasmus Plus, and agree with European universities on backup interinstitutional agreements, which would then be applicable the moment we leave the EU without a deal. So they might not be necessary, and if the deal is ratified, we're fine and everything can continue the way it has. But in case it hadn't, then this way you would already have an interinstitutional agreement lined up to kick in action when it's the 30th of March, and you can continue along those lines. We are developing a template for universities to do that. It will take a few weeks for this to be ready. If you are already speaking with European universities on doing such a bilateral non-Erasmus backup scheme, go ahead, don't wait for that template, but know that it's something that will come your way. And it's also important to that you are aware of any national legislation that might, hinder this, and be aware that this is something that you need to sort out with the lawyers. Also, be mindful of the Competition and Markets Authority guidance. Higher education providers must give clear, intelligible and unambiguous advice about how the course will look like and how it will be taught, which basically means that you cannot advertise a period abroad as an Erasmus period abroad if you're no longer in Erasmus. In the event that the government would provide a replica scheme for Erasmus+, we do encourage universities to reach out to their EU partners as quickly as possible, also so that you can disseminate that information as quickly as possible, and that you can sign up for that UK version of Erasmus as soon as possible. So measures for universities in the EU. Maybe to flag first, what we think it's really important that the European Commission and the UK government enter in discussions as quickly as possible about how the underwrite would work and what the implications of a no-deal exit are. Both sides should really seek practical solutions and make sure that they minimize the disruption of the higher education sector. That being said, what can you do in the EU? Contact your national agency for Erasmus Plus for guidance and support. Contact your national migration authority for information on the migration status of the UK students in your country. Assess and make an overview of your Erasmus Plus partnership with UK institutions. Speak with your UK partners regularly and keep them up to date, and also with an eye on a possible replica scheme or backup programs. Check with your UK partners whether or not they are considering doing a backup program or a parallel program that would help the situation in case of a no-deal exit. And check your national regulation whether or not you can enter into these bilateral agreements with UK partners, and see if there's anything hindering that. For example, are your universities allowed by law to waive fees and these kind of things? So see if there are any barriers there. And share those barriers with us. We're also very keen to know what type of things we need to be working on with our European partners to make sure that we have minimal barriers to this if it happens. So we understand that the UK government has, guaranteed or agreed to underwrite approved projects. There are still some uncertainties about the extent of the underwrite. For example, what if you submit a proposal before the exit date and it's approved after the exit date? We don't know if how universities could receive funding, and how this funding would be provided, and what would happen in the event that the UK would become ineligible for the Erasmus programme. We are therefore suggesting that institutions think through various worst-case scenarios, and we include with this also, scenarios with, for example, delay or failure to pay. So something is in place, but money isn't coming through. The mechanism hasn't been properly developed yet. So that is why we are saying to universities, you need to think about a scenario in which also this happens, but also scenarios in which the UK university is no longer a program or a partner country, and what those implications are for you. Even if there is a national scheme to provide payments, you need to address the various possibilities and agreements that will no longer be valid. So in such a scenario, we have listed a couple of risk areas that you see before you. There are many: dissolution of grant agreements, continuation of work, dissolution of the learning agreement, student well-being, no access to Erasmus Plus IT tools, reaccommodation of students. And for this risk area, what I can say, for example, is for the UK government has said that they will financially underwrite UK students on Erasmus in the EU in case of a no-deal exit. So they are covered. We're still waiting on very important clarifications from the government, but they have said that this will be the case. We don't know, however, how this will work the other way around for EU students on Erasmus in the UK, and therefore we are telling you, ask your national agency what will happen, contact the European Commission and tell them to clarify their position, because in this type of situation, there are massive consequences that would come into play. And the type of questions you as an institution would need to ask yourself are, for example, I'm going to name a few. Would students lose their grants? Would students have to come back to their university? Would there even be room at that university for these students? What happens to their credits? What are the effects of an unfinished Erasmus period abroad for the overall studies of students? How do you ensure continuation of study? Is there any organizational support at your university for the staff and student on Erasmus at the weekend of exit, because we leave on a Friday? What is the financial impact of this on your institution? So these are all things that you would then have to start considering. As I said, for the UK side, our government is going to or has agreed to financially underwrite the grants of students, but we don't know how it works the other way around. For UK universities, we are developing a very detailed checklist on these issues, and this will be published soon, and we hope next week. Switching to the research side of it, some key issues that are linked to a no-deal scenario are the lack of clarity of how the underwrite would work, no details on what would replace the loss of ERC and Marie Curie actions, and of course, as you can imagine, we are asking government to provide fuller details. We know we have the underwrite. The underwrite says that they would, guarantee the projects ongoing and that the UK is already a partner of, but we don't know how this will actually work in practice. And we want to have detailed contingency plans from the government on how they are replacing the parts of Horizon we wouldn't have access to as a third country. And we're also telling government to please talk to the European Commission and asking the European Commission to talk to the government about what the implications of a no-deal scenario are and how they would reach a solution that would minimize disruption, basically. Progress made on these issues is, of course, you've got the underwrite and the underwrite extension, meaning that the UK government will also financially underwrite any bids the UK-based research to do as a third country participant. And that would be for the whole duration of the programme. On top of that, UKRI launched a portal in September, which is for UK-based recipients to upload all of their information regarding their grants and regarding their research, because UKRI will be the organisation that will distribute the national funds. So we encourage all UK-based researchers to upload their details for that. Just to dive into a couple of concerns that we have flagged with government about the underwrite and how it will work, and things that, of course, our universities are thinking about as well. So how will the payments take place? How will the financial supporting work? Will pre-financing be affected because of the change of status? Do we need to change the existing grant agreements because the European Commission is now a partner and that will change? What are the implications in the change of status for ERC grantees? What will the audit requirements be? What will happen with the exchange rates and how will they impact these contracts? Will project coordinators in the UK still receive money from the European Commission to distribute to eligible consortium partners? And of course, what will happen to those projects where the UK will cease, whether the consortia will cease to meet the eligibility requirements when the UK is no longer a member state? So measures for, now finally, the measures for the universities in the UK. Of course, I'm assuming universities in the UK have already got an overview of their projects in Horizon with European partners and what kind of a finance is behind that and the people that are working in there. For UK universities, Brexit is more of a day-to-day thing rather than universities in the EU, I'm presuming. In addition to that, regularly check the BASE and UKRI websites for the latest information. Reassure individuals whose employment is directly linked to EU funding for the government guarantees on citizen rights, but also on the funding they receive. Liaise with your international partners to make sure that you communicate the existing steps taken by the government and the future steps the government will take, and upload your information to the UKRI portal. Then switching to universities in the EU, like we said, we've got the underwrite to provide any negative impact on the consortia with the European partners. It should also be noted, I think this is interesting for European partners, third country participants can coordinate projects. And I say this because the UK coordinates so many projects. So the UK participants don't have to change their status in a consortia if they're coordinated. They can do that. The underwrite, we have it, we've got the extension of the underwrite, so UK partners can still continue to participate in these collaborative bits. Again, as I said, there is lack of how it will particularly work. But then measures for the universities in the EU. So identify your collaborative research projects under the societal challenges that include UK partners and or consortia leaders. Communicate the government, the UK government's assurances on this, and write to those research groups. Identify staff mobility. Of course, those of staff who are mobile at the moment of exit with some urgency, and continue to liaise with UK partners to identify areas in your consortia and in your project that would need or would require contingency planning. Then two topics I'll dive in quite quickly, qualification recognition and EU student fees, or I should say student fees, not just EU student fees. Students studying for qualifications that are at the moment mutually recognised, this might change in the future. The UK government has said that any future arrangement for mutual recognition would be something they would have to negotiate with the European Commission. And the Brexit white paper the government published has said that they want to establish a mutual recognition system that's very similar to what the European MRPQ directive does at the moment. So these are all positive signals. For UK universities at the moment, in order not to breach CMA guidelines, you have to make sure that you do not advertise professional qualifications as being automatically recognized in the EU. We are asking government, of course, to secure an agreement that makes sure that the professional qualifications that are recognized continue to be recognized, and this would also not just be for now, but also in the future, and also let us know what these future arrangements would be as quickly as possible. Mitigating actions for EU universities, check if your government will honor these same guarantees, like recognizing the qualification, reach out to staff members and seek guidance from your national ministry. Student fees, Mike already said it, so don't really need to say much about this, but for 2019-20, they are guaranteed. We are asking the government to do the same for 2020-2021, figuring that, you know, universities need a longer time to prepare for this. And why I said it's not just EU student fees, it's student fees generally, it's because member states need to decide as well what they'll do for the student fees of UK students studying in their universities. So very quickly, other areas, I've made two lists. Like I said, I won't dive into them to go on all of the different topics about what they mean for your university, but we wanted to flag these for you because they are very important. And just to flag a few of them, when you're thinking about procurement and we're thinking about supply chains, the risks pertain to continuation of supply and cost elements. So these are things to consider are supply in labor, supply in raw materials, shortages in those supplies, delays in supplies, clearances at ports, requirements for transporting goods, currency fluctuation costs, very, very detailed, but these are the type of things that you should be thinking about. Try to create resilient supply chains and evaluate what you have in place right now and see if they're low, medium, or high risk. Another thing is risk managing data, and the risks there are, possible delay or a failure to achieve the status you need for the GDPR, possible halt or free flow of personal data, and also a disruption of the use of clouds. Storage space, or is that a proper word? I don't know. Universities should consider when they're reviewing their data transfers, what is going to whom, how often, how much, and which mechanisms are you using. These are just two, but check our document on the website of Universities UK to see what the actual no deal applications are. So now I'm going to quickly switch to Michael again for some messaging on the future relationship after exit, 2020 and onwards. Michael.
Thank you, Emma. I think we'll just go through this quite quickly because I think we're running out of time to give people the chance to ask some questions. So might as well go to yeah, we can start there. Actually, that's a good place to start. So I've already spoken about our desire to kind of make sure the deal happens. What do we know from the UK so far? So we'll start with the immigration stuff. Why not? That's a good place to start. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of kind of key things on here. So the first and probably the most important is that free movement will end. It's one of the red lines of government for Brexit, and so that is pretty much guaranteed, I think. And then the second one I wanted to highlight was that the existing automatic preference for EU citizens will end, thereby creating a level playing field. And so basically the idea for this is that the UK wants to attract the best and the brightest, and it feels that if we prioritize one group of people over another, then we are not necessarily kind of opening ourselves to a full market. And so I think the idea behind this is to create that kind of broader market. So it doesn't mean that we won't have EU citizens kind of taking most of those roles and jobs. I mean, there's a very good chance that would continue because of the close relationship we've had in the past. But I think what we're doing here is we're trying not to kind of close the door to prioritize particular groups of people. I then wanted to talk very, very briefly about the national consultation. So I think some of you probably would have seen in the press some of this. So essentially, the Home Office is doing a consultation at the moment on what are the things that the UK needs for the future, and a lot of this is linked to the industrial strategy. How do we kind of fill the gaps for the future? And it will be looking at things in terms of how do we define our immigration system? What are the kinds of people, kind of things and skills that we are looking for? So it'd be quite important for you to kind of take part in that if you have the time and the inclination to do so, to contribute to that, particularly from the universities. We need them to be involved in that so that they can shape the future of what they want to see in terms of students, but also researchers and professors and other kind of professionals working within the research and academia kind of communities. And then there's some interesting stuff there for universities, which are again just quickly over. So the long ongoing debate about whether students should be counted in immigration numbers seems to be kind of coming out that they shouldn't be for the future. And there's lots of kind of ideas about how they can make it easier for graduates to stay and work in the UK for longer periods than currently available. Again, a lot of that is all part of this consultation process, so please do kind of take part if you have the opportunity to do so. And then just right at the bottom there is EEA. So just really, that's just the flag that the UK government has had conversations with EEA countries as well about trying to make sure that whatever we agree with the EU is reciprocated across the EEA. And we've had some very positive conversations with the Norwegians, the Icelandics, and also Switzerland. Next slide, Anne-May, as quick as I can.
Sorry, Michael.
That's okay. So on this bit, I think what the UK kind of set out in its white paper back in May is essentially where we want to be in the long term. So we see, from the UK's perspective, we see a lot of really good work comes from our collaboration with the EU, and we don't want to stop that. We want to encourage that, and we want to grow that. Equally, we hope that the EU, and we believe that they understand that the value of the UK science to the EU is equally as beneficial. And so a lot of the conversations we've had around science with European partners has been very positive. And the political agreement, which obviously hasn't passed through Parliament, if you look through that, it has a lot of very strong language about how we make sure we maintain and grow our future science relationship. And I think this is probably one of the areas that's not extremely contentious. It was one of the few areas that the UK announced very early that it would be willing to pay to play, to be part of programs. And that is across the spectrum of both political parties, but also those on the various ends of the Brexit scale. And so I think that the kind of ambition won't change. I think the ambition will continue to be as close a relationship as is possible, with as much benefit as is possible. And so, yeah, so hopefully you'll see more in this space, I think, for the future. But yeah, until other things start moving, it's hard to kind of be 100% sure, but it really does feel like this is a positive area to work with. I'm done.
Thank you, Michael. Then I'll take over just a little bit on Erasmus. Very quickly, just that the UK government has said publicly that they are very interested in Erasmus and they want to negotiate the terms, specific terms for the UK to associate to this program. So I think that's a very positive signal. The UK government really does see the value of this program, and so we're optimistic about what they want for the future there. Then really quickly, we as a sector body, what we want for the future, and there shouldn't be any surprises here. There are two kind of strands of work: UK-EU relationship and domestic policy reform. Of course, fully associated to Horizon Europe, full access to Erasmus, continued mutual recognition professional qualifications, the European Investment Bank, and on domestic policy reform, we want an immigration system that attracts global talent, enhanced support for international research collaboration, but also support for outward student mobility and regulatory standards that really keep being aligned so that our researchers in the UK can continue to work together with those in the EU. Just real quickly on the legislative proposals for Erasmus and Horizon Europe, so 2021 onwards, just to flag that the 4 freedoms are not criteria to participate. We often get the question, but don't you need freedom of movement to be in these programs? No, you don't. There are countries in both programs that do not have freedom of movement with the EU, and the specific terms for the UK to associate these programs will be up for negotiations. People often cite the Swiss example as why freedom of movement is needed. We're running a bit short, so I'm not going to dive into it, but the Swiss example had to do with how the treaties the Swiss had with the EU were set up. Namely, they were in a guillotine clause. If you breach one, you breach all. It wasn't necessarily freedom of movement, it was that the Swiss breached a treaty which breached all of them. Then that was the meaty part of the webinar, the heavy duty content, and just wanted to flag that we have a International Higher Education Forum taking place on the 27th of March, 2 days before the exit. As you can imagine, we have a lot of Brexit content, but there's also a lot of non-Brexit related content. Over 400 international higher education professionals attend each year. It's a wonderful networking opportunity, and our Minister for Universities, Chris Skidmore, will be speaking there, as will many others. So if you're interested, have a look at our website. Maybe you want to sign up. Then a slide that gives you basically the references and the links to all the documents we've been talking about, just as some background information for you. And now I would like to welcome the rest of the panel back, Michael and Inga. But before we dive into the Q&A, Inga, I know we're running short on time, but is there something you wanted to highlight just really briefly before we dive into the questions?
Thank you, Annemai. Thank you, Michael. Just really quickly, you already mentioned the UKRA portal where UK participants, so this is a message predominantly for the UK participants, but those of you who have UK partners on your projects, you might want to double check with them that they've actually done this, is to log grants of UK beneficiaries in this UKRA portal. The link is available in the presentation. This has been set up by UKRI, who's been chosen as the delivery partner for the underwrite guarantee, should it be needed in a no-deal scenario, to make sure that there's continuity of funding for the UK partners in the project. So it is also of interest for those of you who aren't from the UK, in the sense that this should reassure that funding continues to flow to the UK partners on your projects who would become third country participants in the projects in a no-deal scenario. What I would just like to say, it should be fairly quick to register your grants. If you only have a couple, it's possible to submit them individually via the portal. If you have a lot, there's a possibility to submit multiple grants via an Excel spreadsheet, which you can request. There's an email on the portal website where you can request this. I would also encourage those of you who are researchers, this is really the idea is that the LEA in the kind of Horizon 2020, your research office submits these grants so that you don't do multiple submissions across an individual institution. And also to say that this portal remains open, so it's possible to submit grants that you win even after the first submission date. And a final just plea from me, and I'm sure Anna-Maja would agree, both you, UK, and us, we would really appreciate any questions you might have even beyond this webinar series. This is the one thing we can do for you at the moment, is if we have your practical questions, what are you worried about at the moment? What do you need to know to continue working with your UK partners or with your EU grants if you are in the UK? So we can help feed that into the relevant processes. So that's just an encouragement to contact Anna-Maja at the UK or myself at ACRO to kind of let us know about these questions so that we can make sure they get at least logged at the moment being, and eventually you get a response as well to them.
Wonderful, thank you, Inga. Then we'll dive into the questions. I've got them right here on my screen, so let me just go to them. Okay, first up, are you suggesting that UK students who are on Erasmus beneficiaries on courses in the EU on 30th of March may be repatriated on the event of a no-deal Brexit? Let me stress, no, that is not what I'm suggesting, because we've got the guarantee of the UK government that they will underwrite the student fees. So they will get their grants, and they will do that. It's just that we are waiting on clarification of the government, and that is something that we are waiting for and should be clarified next week on how they would do that, how the underwrite would actually work. So no, I don't want to cause a panic. That is not what I'm suggesting. Next one. Do you advise universities to address the risk of a no-deal Brexit in their Horizon 2020 applications under the part risk assessment and Erasmus applications? Do you have a template for this risk assessment? That's maybe best a question for you, Inga, on whether or not they would have to include this in their application.
So what I can say, there is actually an answer from the Commission on this as well. So there's a frequently asked questions section on the participant portal. This refers to Horizon 2020, so I couldn't say for sure that it's the same advice on Erasmus, but I would assume so. And that clearly states that for the moment being, this isn't an expectation to have this in the proposal. I'm not saying people shouldn't think about it when they form their consortia, when they kind of start the planning, but it isn't an official requirement. The Commission is very clear on their website that the UK continues to currently be a member state with all the rights and obligations, and that this is something that's very much reflected in the application process. And it's also something evaluators are reminded of in their guidance. And all of this is available on the Commission's website. We can probably add that to the slides if that's useful as well. There's a direct link I can make available.
Thank you, Inga. Then next question. Do you advise universities to address, yeah, it's the same, sorry, that's the same question. Is there a risk the European Commission will change the rules for participation not to allow TC beneficiaries to coordinate projects? Inga?
I'll try again. Now, as Michael said earlier, we can't possibly speculate, so I should say that first. The current rules are that third countries can participate in certain parts of the program. In order to change the rules, there's certain processes that would have to be. So those of you who have participated in Horizon 2020 for some time, they know there's the Model Grant Agreement, which provides the basic rules for the program. In order for this to be changed, it needs all member states to agree with the changes. So this isn't something the Commission could do unilaterally. I can't answer the question. At the same time, what I would like to point out is that it's a program that's open to the world in its design. So I think it wouldn't just be about changing the rules. It would probably have to then go a bit further if any such changes were made, because they would really address then the nature of the program, which is supposed to be open and allow international cooperation.
Thank you, Inga. Next question. Regarding MLPQ directive, if there's a no deal, then the EU guidance says professional qualifications awarded in the UK after Brexit will be third country qualifications, and therefore recognition will be at the discretion of each of the 27 member states. Very true. What we are hoping actually is that the government still would be able to talk to the Commission about this, and there would be a bilateral, UK government to Commission type of agreement on this, rather than having to do with each of the 27 member states, just purely because that will be a lot easier to do. The qualifications, they are recognized right now, the standards and the qualities are good enough. That should also be good enough then in the future. So, but you're right. But we are hoping that there is an alternative solution for this. Next question. Any more information on the Creative Europe program, creative freelance visas? Unfortunately, I'm not a Creative Europe expert. We do have the Creative Europe desk here in the UK, so we'll definitely contact them. I know that they are working on Brexit just as we are, but we are just in line with Horizon and Erasmus, asking governments and asking the Commission, saying that we want to be part of these programs. We are lobbying for it, and the Creative Europe desk is lobbying for it as well. But if you want any specific contact questions, I would definitely reach out to the Creative Europe desk. Then another question. Thank you very much for a very informative session. Being the institutional Erasmus coordinator at a Norwegian higher education. Hi, great, thanks for joining us. I'm left with more questions than I realized they might, I can understand. They might be too far out for this context, but do you have any idea if the underwrite of Erasmus students may include students between UK and Norway as well? I would assume so, yes, because it's part of the Erasmus scheme, so then they should be covered. Yeah, they should be covered. In that sense, it doesn't differentiate between member states and EEA countries. It just refers to the Erasmus program as a whole, and therefore they, Norway as a country should be included. I don't know what your specific ask is, so I would say email me, and I'll try and sort this specific question out a little bit better. And then the next question. Thank you for the webinar. UK government underwrite covers funding received by and to be spent in UK partners only. Is there any further guidance or clarifications pending regarding EU contribution UK coordinates receive to distribute to EU partners? So yeah, whether or not UK coordinators could then distribute the funding to EU partners. I think, Inga, this is one for you.
Yes, so within the current rules, that understanding is that is something that's possible, and there's also precedence for this.
Yeah, so it should be, but third countries, like I said, third country participants can coordinate a project. That does happen. So if the UK becomes a third country, that shouldn't change. Okay, I think one more question and then we'll have to stop. Sorry for starting a bit late, but if you have any questions that we haven't answered or we haven't flagged yet, feel free to email us and we'll address them offline. Oh no, that was just my organizer telling me that's all the questions there are. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. I just want to say thank you for Michael and Inga for joining us. I really appreciate taking your time off for this. I just also want to stress that Universities UK is really working very hard to minimize any negative effects of Brexit, not just for universities in the UK, but also for universities in the EU. If, like I said, if there are any issues, there are so many things going on, but if there's any issues that you think we should be aware of, please contact us and let us know. We need to know as much as we can, both within the EU and in the UK. Any concerns, just flag them with us and send us an email. Any questions you think we haven't addressed or haven't addressed properly, also just email us and we'll address them offline. This is a webinar series, so in 2 months, a little bit less than 2 months, we'll do the next webinar, which will be on the 5th of March. And this webinar will be put online and the slides will be available as well tomorrow. And yeah, like I said, any questions you have will be followed up later on. For all those online, thank you so much for joining us. I really hope this has given you some tools and some guidance on what to do to prepare in a no-deal exit. Like I said, this situation might not come to pass, but at least today we hope we've given you some guidance. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you at the next webinar on the 5th of March. Thank you.